So defeated the Black Dragonflight, resisted the forces of the Burning Legion in Outland, and now it's time to venture into the perilous and unforgiving frozen wasteland of Northrend. You will face many challenges and many formidable foes inside the floating necropolis of Naxxramas, the Old God prison facility Ulduar, and finally the frozen halls of Icecrown Citadel. And naturally, all these powerful enemies are hiding some bonkers loot for us to go and steal. Today we're going to be counting down some of the most powerful weapons that the Wrath of the Lich King expansion has to offer. Now, as a disclaimer, we won't just be talking about the biggest DPS weapons of each phase, since that would be too boring and predictable, but also we're going to highlight the more underrated weapons that pack a really good punch, especially when you consider how easy they are to obtain. The kind of weapons that give you a huge power spike in your gearing journey. Now guys, if you're looking to get ahead of everyone for the Wrath of the Lich King launch, I've got a little guide of the best 25 quests to prepare in your quest log and a route to turn them in extremely efficiently and quickly for a huge chunk of XP. To gain access to this guide, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, go to my subscriber only video and check the description for that guide. Now let's jump into the first weapon on this list, Brintol the Bone Arbiter. This drops from Lord Morogar, the first boss of Icecrown Citadel. The heroic version has 325 DPS and has 3 weapon gem sockets and a proc effect that has a chance to steal health from the enemy. And now this is the most interesting element of this weapon. This weapon did experience some changes during the original Wrath of the Lich King, obviously mainly nerfs, and it has many different applications to many different specs. Before it got nerfed, Unholy Death Knight talents used to actually increase the power of that health drain effect, largely the Impurity talent and the Ebon Plaguebringer talent. I've also read a Wowhead comment saying that 20% of a Blood Death Knight's healing actually came from this weapon alone. This is probably because it has a chance to proc off disease applying effects like Icy Touch and Pestilence, but also double proc off abilities like Plague Strike, since that's a melee attack but also technically a magic attack because it does apply a magic debuff. Technically it is a disease, but in the game it is a magic effect. And it could also proc multiple times on one attack, like things like Whirlwind or Divine Storm. And when you can consider how Fury Warriors can actually dual wield these with Titan's Grip, that's going to be a lot of healing in a battleground situation. Next we have a staff, the Nibelung. The heroic version has 837 spell power and 3 gem sockets, but it also has a unique proc effect with a chance to summon a Valkyrie. And this can actually proc multiple times, so you can have multiple Valkyries summoned at once. When for instance a Boomkin deals AoE damage, that's going to increase the chance for it to proc. And should be able to get 3 of them summoned at once. Now they cast a smite spell for 1.5 to 1.7k damage and also heal themselves for the 25% of the damage done. Unfortunately they don't scale with your stats, but they have a small 5% crit chance and they will actually respond to pet commands. So even if you're playing a fire mage for instance, get your pet attack macros made. There will likely be a lot of arguments when it comes to what class has priority for this item when ICC rocks up, because it has different chances to proc for different classes. For instance, it has a pretty bad proc chance on Arcane Mages since it doesn't proc off Arcane Missiles, but then it's also really good for dot classes since it can proc off dot ticks and also Living Bomb explosions. Again, this is all according to old Wowhead comments. Things may change when Wrath of the Lich King Classic does actually turn up. For the third weapon on our list, we have the Librarian's Paper Cutter. This is a dagger with 130 DPS, 26 crit, and 46 haste. Now you may be wondering why on earth a blue weapon is even on this list, but this is one of the most underrated weapons in the game, considering you can easily buy this from the auction house. It has a high chance to drop from high level Wrath of the Lich King dungeons, so it'll probably sell really cheap. Cheap when you consider the power of this weapon. Anyway, the main reason this weapon is so powerful is because of an obscenely fast weapon speed of 1.3 seconds. Now 1.3 weapon speed daggers are quite rare, and they are perfectly itemized for the only class of the game that really uses daggers, the Assassination Rogue. Although this is still being simulated and debated in the Rogue Classic Discord, I would recommend going over there to keep up with the most accurate info. But so far, the thinking is, the faster the main hand weapon, the higher chance for your poisons to proc. Especially when you consider how Slice and Dice will reduce the weapon speed of this weapon lower than 1 second, which is absolutely nutty. Imagine what it's going to be like during a heroism. For number 4, I know that this weapon is pretty predictable, but it wouldn't be a most powerful weapon list without it. The true most powerful weapon in Wrath of the Lich King is actually Shadowmourne. Now obviously the stats on this weapon are utterly nutty like Glorinzelg, but instead of expertise you have armor penetration. But the most interesting thing to talk about here is obviously the very unique proc effect. So your melee attacks have a chance to give you a soul fragment providing 30 strength, and this will stack 10 times until you gain Chaos Bane. This unleashes 1900 to 2100 damage split between all enemies in 15 yards and then grants you 270 strength for 10 seconds. Now people use a little bit of a trick for Shadowmourne by using a cancel aura macro to cancel Chaos Bane that both that gives you 270 strength for 10 seconds, which seems like a really bad idea. But the idea is to cause the Chaos Bane damage proc to occur more often. Using this cancel aura macro, you should be able to increase your DPS by roughly 400. And since the fragments stack up so quickly, you're not really losing that much of a strength buff. This is how people did it back in the day anyway. Like I found an old post that explains it fairly thoroughly. I'll leave that in the description for you to check it out. Like I've said, it may turn out differently in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Blizzard might make changes to the weapon. Interestingly, Shadowmourne did actually get nerfed, so pre-nerf you didn't have to use a cancel aura macro. It would give you 40 strength per soul fragment to a total of 400 strength, and then do Chaos Bane, and then just reset on its own. Fifthly, we have the rather underrated Inevitable Defeat. It has 203 DPS, 100 strength, 80 agility, 120 stamina and 78 expertise. Now this definitely isn't the best two-handed weapon in Naxxramas that you can get by any means. But it is definitely the most underrated when you consider how easy this is to obtain since it drops from trash mobs. So even before you've completed 25-man Naxxramas, you can easily do trash runs to farm the weapon. Most warriors, DKs and rep paladins will eventually end up with this weapon because, like I said, it's so easy to obtain. You're always clearing a lot of trash in Naxxramas. It's actually not too bad for a feral druid either, whether they're playing DPS or tank. But the guy who wants this weapon the most is the Blood Death Knight tank. Since the stats are perfectly tuned for a Death Knight tank, there's a beefy amount of strength and agility that provide a lot of mitigation, especially since 25% of all strength for a Death Knight is converted into parry. Stamina is also better than anything that you can get from Phase 1 raids, and the cherry on the top is that it has expertise, always great for tanks since they do face the boss. Now we have the Battered Hill. So this is an item that drops from all the 3.3 dungeons. And it's actually a BoE epic that starts a quest. These can actually also be sold on the auction house. This will take you on a long, lore-packed quest line that will eventually unlock several different very powerful weapons for every spec in the game, apart from a good tank one-hander. It does have a decent Death Knight tank weapon though. But the most desired version of this weapon is the Quel'Dalar Cunning of the Shadow. This is the one-handed weapon option. It's great for combat rogues and Death Knights. It has a nutty amount of crit since it has agility and crit rating on it, and also 39 armor penetration. The weapon speed is also ideal for these classes since it has a very slow 2.7 speed, which means it's perfect for those abilities that scale off weapon damage when you equip it in your main hand. And now we actually have a healing weapon, the rather predictable Valinor Hammer of the Ancient Kings. This is the Ulduar legendary healing mace with 621 spell power and the unique proc effect called Blessing of the Ancient Kings that lasts 15 seconds. It has a very similar effect to the Scarab Brooch from AQ40. It causes your healing spells to add a shield for 15% of the healing done. It has a 10% chance to proc off any direct heal or whenever a hot spell does a heal. It does have a 45-second eternal cooldown. The damage shield lasts 8 seconds on the target and will actually stack on itself. However, you can't proc on overhealing, it has to be on an actual heal that does healing. But it will stack up to 20k damage absorption. All other healers in your guild will likely argue a huge amount about as to what healer this should go to. Unfortunately, Disc Priest probably won't get it first, they won't be high on the list, even though the effect does actually proc off Power Word Shield, and also the glyph that heals from Power Word Shield. But min-maxers debate that giving it to a Resto Druid, Shaman or Paladin will provide more value, but I'm going to leave a comment section in class Discord to argue about that. For number 8 we have Glorinzelg, the second most powerful weapon in the game, 344 DPS, 198 strength, 222 stamina, 122 crit and 114 expertise with 3 red sockets and a cheeky plus strength bonus. This is obviously also the best offhand weapon for a Fury Warrior when they do eventually get Shadowmourne. Honestly, the main reason why people want this weapon so much is actually the expertise. Obviously the stats are nutty, but there's other weapons with nutty stats. What makes this stand out is the expertise, because it helps you get that expertise cap so much easier, which is a big boost to your DPS. Now the flavor text of this weapon makes it sound like a paladin weapon, and it probably was once before, but like the corrupted Ashbringer, this weapon has been captured and corrupted by the Death Knight of the Scourge, which is the reason behind the more sinister design. The weapon literally looks like the Scourge broke it into pieces and rebuilt it with evil and dark magic, and also for some reason decided to duct tape a skull pendant to it. Nonetheless, one of the most iconic looking weapons in the game, and the name of this weapon roughly translates as Child of the Dawn's Light in Old Dutch. Our second to last weapon is the best pre-raid weapon that you can probably obtain. It's the Colossal Skull-clad Cleaver. It's 186 DPS, 90 strength, 54 agility, and a big chunk of 90 haste. Rather than giving you 2 different stats there, it just gives you 1 big chunk of haste. It's also pretty decent for tanking too, since it has 94 stamina. This is on par with raid loot from Naxxramas 10-man. So every single 2-hander spec is going to be farming Halls of Lightning to get this as soon as they can, particularly as Naxxramas is going to take a couple of weeks to actually release on launch. Rep Paladins want it, Warriors want it, well, they want 2 of them. Death Knight tanks definitely want it, and Unholy DK's playing at 2-handed spec will also want it. Now lastly, we have a ranged weapon called Rowan's Rifle of Silver Bullets. Now the reason why I think this weapon is fairly underrated is because of how easy you can obtain this weapon. You can just buy it off the auction house because it does drop off ICC trash. But obviously this is a tanking range weapon, which makes it really good for a protection warrior. But imagine this scenario: you are ulting a hunter for ICC and you have a crappy green quest gun, and then suddenly you can upgrade it, just with a bit of gold, to an epic ICC level weapon. It's also fairly good for a hunter while they are gearing up in ICC because of the fast weapon speed. It kind of messes you over a lot when it comes to actual rotation and abilities and how the hunter works, but it does have an increased chance of proccing your 10-piece 2-set bonus called Exploit Weakness that increases your pet's damage by 15% for 10 seconds. Since the effect does proc off individual weapon hits from your ranged weapon, so you have really good uptime with it. But it's by no means the best ranged weapon that hunters can get. It's just very, very good, considering you can go from being a crappy green geared hunter to suddenly having an epic weapon by just visiting the auction house. Anyway guys, that's going to be the end of the video there. Good luck on loot when Wrath of the Lich King Classic does finally turn up, and if you liked the video, do consider subscribing, it really helps out. I'm trying to smash 100k by the end of the month. But anyway, my name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.